The last thing that we're going to do with our recipe API is test it in the browsable API. So let's go ahead, open up the terminal or the command prompt or the PowerShell, whatever it is you prefer to use. And what we need to do is make sure that the migrations are applied to our database. So if you are already running the server, if you already have the server running, then press Control C. You want to stop that server and we're going to start it again, because that way we will ensure the new migrations we added for our recipe project are going to be applied to the database. So we'll do docker compose up. And this is going to go ahead and create the services. So it's going to create the Docker containers, it's going to run them. And then you can see here it applied our recipe migration. So that worked okay, there was no errors, it's always good to see. The next thing is we are going to load up the browser. I'm going to open up the browser here. And then we're going to do 127.0.0.1/API/docs. Okay, so we have our authentication here. We need to authenticate in order to use these recipe endpoints. So you may have noticed that we have these new recipe endpoints that exist, and they were automatically added to our documentation without us having to write a single line of code, other than the lines of code to actually add them. But we didn't have to enable them in the browsable documentation or anything like that. They're automatically added to the documentation as we add APIs to our project. So if we expand one here, like the get, you can see it says view for manage recipe APIs. Now this is taken from our doc strings that we define inside our view. So if we go to the view here, you can see inside views, we define the docstring view for manage recipe APIs. So if you wanted to add more detailed documentation, you can simply expand on this docstring and add more details to your documentation here. So this is a great thing about the Swagger docs. If you try and make a request, you see that it returns the authentication error because we're not authenticated with the API. So what we need to do is first authenticate. So we can do that by going to the token API, and we're going to do try it out. I'm going to pass in my user. I believe it was called user@example.com. Example.com, and then my password. I believe this should be correct. Yep, this is a valid user. So I have a token here. I'll go up to the authentication, authorize, and we're going to type in token, and then paste in the contents of the token, do authorize. Now we'll just test that worked by using the get on the get me. This is going to get my user. Yep, so we are authenticated. Now let's go ahead, test our recipe APIs. So we've got recipe/recipes. This is for listing the APIs. If we run execute again, you see an empty response here, an empty as 200 response, so it was a successful, but it's empty because we haven't created any recipes in our API yet. So if we were to create one, we'll go to post, we'll click try it out, and then I'll just fill out these details. So I'll put sample recipe, and then the time minutes we'll put, let's say 10 minutes. The price we'll put $2.50, and then the link we'll just put example.com, and then some description here. Okay, we click execute. You see we got a 201 created, and the response body included the recipe object that was actually created. So now if we go back and we collapse the recipes post, we'll just do recipes get again, call execute, and then you can see this time it returns the object. So this is the preview view. So this is the recipe serializer view. So we go to serializers, this view here. Because we're calling the list, we're getting this view because that's what we configured inside views.py. We said if we're calling a list, get the recipe serializer. So that's why we see this kind of preview here that doesn't include the description. If we want to get the specific details of the recipe, then we can go to the get here with the ID. And you can see that it allows you to pass in ID here. We'll just click on try it out. And the ID, I believe, is just 1. We go back to recipes, we just need to check that. So yeah, the ID is 1 because this is the first recipe. So that's the value we provide here. And then we click execute. And you see now it gets the detail view of that recipe. So we have all of the details that were provided in the list, plus the description. And this, of course, is just a demo. Later on, we're going to be adding more fields to the detail view. And the reason we do that is just because typically what you would want is, if you're building an app, a recipe management app, then you would have the user would be able to list all of their recipes, which kind of gives them a summary of each recipe. Like maybe it's includes the title and a few details on that list page. And then when they choose, they either, if it's an app, maybe they tap on, or if it's a website, they might click on that particular recipe. Then they're taken to the detail page. And because the user probably isn't going to click on every single one of the recipes, we don't want to use unnecessary resources to transfer all of the details of the recipe that aren't needed for the user to see. So we want to retrieve the details of a recipe when they actually choose a specific recipe to view in the app or website that their API is used for. Okay, so now if we go to the put and patch, we can make updates. So if we do put, we try it out, and we'll just delete everything. And let's say we wanted to change the title. We'll just provide new title. We'll do execute. Well, we need to provide the ID again. So because this has to happen on a detail view, we need to provide the ID here. So for recipe 1, we're going to change the title to new title. Click execute. You can see that we got an issue here. It said bad request. The time, minutes is required, and the price is required. So we actually need to provide those in the request here. So we could do that. We'll do time, minutes, 10, and then the other one was price. So this is a good view of the errors that are returned. So you can see that it actually gives the response errors that can be used to fill in the details on the front end that you're using. So this is provided by Django REST Framework. It's one of the great features of Django REST Framework is it handles all the validation for you. So if the front end client makes a request and that request is the validation fails, it will actually give a response that the application can use to tell the user specifically why it failed. So for example, it could highlight these fields, time, minute, and price, and it could show this error message next to each one so that the user knows what they need to fix, instead of it just saying generically, there was a problem or something like that. Okay, so if we do price, we'll do 10, do execute. Okay, and this is happening because we're doing a put request, and the put request requires the full object here. So you can see that it updated the items here in the put request. We can also test the patch. So patch would actually be better if we just want to change one field. So if we just want to change out the description to new updated description, we could do that in the patch. That should work successfully. There you go. So it's updated the description of the recipe there. And then obviously we have delete. So if we're done with this recipe, we no longer want it, the user can delete it from the system. So now it's totally gone. And if we go back to the list here, you can see it's empty again. So they need to create more recipes. Okay, so that's our recipe API fully created and working in our project.